Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's How to Ace Your Next Executive Interview. Questions can be submitted anytime during the presentation via the Q&A pod located on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. A copy of today's recording will be sent to you after the presentation. I will be standing by if you need any assistance. It is now my pleasure to turn the conference over to Ms. Kathy Simmons.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to How to Ace Your Next Executive Interview. I'm Kathy Simmons, and I am the Director of Blue Steps Executive Career Services. Just before we get started today, I want to give you some information about a couple of special offers that we have. If you're already a member of Blue Steps, you can take advantage of today's webinar offer, which is an executive resume CV or CV with using the code INTERVIEW and receive a complimentary hour of interview coaching. So request your career consultation today and take advantage of that code. And if you're not a Blue Steps member and you're thinking about joining, if you join before March 7th, you can get a 15% discount on your Blue Steps lifetime membership by using the code executive15 at the checkout. Again, you can submit questions via the question box in the corner of your screen, and we will be sending you a link to download the recording after we finish today's program. It's my pleasure to introduce our panel today. We've got a great panel: John Ryan, Bill Weber, and Adrian Willig. John, if you take a couple of minutes and give us some of your background, please.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening into the webinar. These are a lot of fun to do, and it's a lot of fun to help people. I am the U.S. VP for TrendSearch International, which is a UK-based search firm with offices in 35 countries. We have about 200 consultants worldwide in 50 offices, and we all routinely work together and support international clients that we have as well as local clients. I spend most of my time these days working in the industry practice, which includes things like power, automotive, aerospace, and other high-tech manufacturing, and handle CXO down to VP and occasionally director spots and board positions. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, John. All right. Bill, if you'd tell us a little bit about your background, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Bill Weber, and I'm president and co-founder of the Development Guild. After John, I feel we're really small. We only have 30 people, and we're only U.S.-based. We do focus on higher education and academic, medical, and complex nonprofits. We have offices in Boston and New York, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Bill. And Adrian, let's hear about your background.
Hi, it's nice to have a chance to chat with you all, and I'm Adrian Willig. I am a senior partner with Witt Kiefer. We are based here in the Chicago area, but we have offices around the country and most recently an international office as well. Our focus at Witt Kiefer is really executive level healthcare and higher education searches. Those are the two sectors that we work with, and I am focused particularly on the healthcare sector.
All right, thank you. All right, let's get started. We're going to be talking about pre-interview preparation and practice, and I'm going to start with a question, pretty broad one here, about how candidates should prepare for an executive interview. And Bill, I'd love to call on you first to give us your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, I want to focus on what's a little bit different about an executive search recruiter interview as opposed to every other interviewer. So the executive recruiter, I think, is almost like a casting director. When they interview you, they're trying to think, can I put this candidate on stage with my client? And you're looking for evidence of accomplishments, personality, and interest. And what we're doing is a successive approximation. Can I get you from this stage to the next stage? So they're not the decision maker, and they can't answer all your specific questions about the water cooler culture or anything else, but they give you the big picture idea of the profile and what success would look like. Last but not least, they're not your friend. We're friendly, but not your friend. An example that came to mind earlier this week, I was talking to someone who's helped before, who I'm friendly with, who asked for advice. He knew that I knew that he had a 3-month stint that didn't work out, and his friend told him to take it off his resume. And I said, I like you, I'm not your friend, you better keep it on the resume, I don't want any surprises. So we're casting directors, we're working with you, we're trying to get to the next level. So that's the framework that I think about.
Excellent. Adrian, any other thoughts about preparation?
Yeah, I think I'm going to take it a little different direction, and just thinking of preparing, of walking into any interview, and be it one that Bill was just referring to with the executive search firm, or just an interview with a potential employer. And I think first and foremost, you need to make sure that you've got your research done, be it on the firm, on the person you're meeting with. Look up the people who you'll be meeting with, look up the competitive landscape, and then I think also another word of advice would be to make sure you practice some of those tough questions that you think you might get. And I say that because so oftentimes I've seen candidates stumble on certain questions. And when I say the tough questions, I don't mean the traditional ones about tell us about your weakness. I mean things like, I see you're not working now. Why did you leave your last company? And or what have you been doing since you've left? People oftentimes have a tendency to stumble around those, and it can leave the interviewer feeling like you're hiding something. So my word of advice is to be direct, to be honest and forthright, and practice that in a very succinct but approach that states the facts and then moves on. And then I think the other piece of it is just to make sure that you come prepared with questions, that it's questions specific to the type of people that you'll be meeting with. And finally, relax. Some nervousness, of course, is normal, and I think is good, but too much of it, and if you show your nervousness, has them questioning your leadership ability.
Great points. John, I know you have a lot of thoughts about due diligence and how to get prepared for the interview. Love it if you would share some of your thoughts about that.
This is a topic I'm pretty rabid about, to be honest. So this applies also to me. I really push people, the individuals we work with, and as well as my internal colleagues, to really do their homework and due diligence with respect to the company and the opportunity. If an individual is interviewing for, say, a CFO role, and they've been introduced by a search firm, there have already been conversations ongoing regarding the role and the people and where the company is headed. But you should still do your own research, which can be reviewing all the information out there about the company. A nice, easy thing to look at is also look at press releases as well. Look at what they've also shared out there with respect to things like acquisitions and things like that. So there's usually a lot of information out there. Another thing I like to look for, if it's out there, is to do keyword searches on the people I'm interviewing with and see if they have any videos. So in addition to their bios, associated press releases, articles that they've authored, they also may have been interviewed by some sort of publication, and that interview might give you some insight into their personality or what they think is key about their company's mission or something. So there's just a lot of information on the internet. So go do it.
Great advice. Bill, any thoughts additionally to that on due diligence prior to the interview?
It's got a sort of friendly amendments to what John just said, because I really like everything he said. We're seeing a lot of people using Glassdoor more often, and that's hit or miss, but it might give you some information because it's unverified comments about employers. And of course, you could research the search firm as well as the employer, so you can get two sets of information. But the other thing I was thinking about is, everybody knows their own website isn't truly up to date or isn't truly accurate. So you don't want to be guilty of misplaced precision and assume everything that you see is actually true. So, or it's sometimes incomplete. So I often ask people to verify what they saw on the web or on Glassdoor as assumed to just conclude that it's true because it's probably changed a bit. But you got to do all the due diligence because I think what John said and others just said that if they hire you, they expect you to prepare. So the best proxy for that is your preparation for the interview. So that's it.
Good point. All right, let's get into those typical interview questions and sort of what we mean when we ask, tell me about yourself. Adrian, you want to speak to that one?
Certainly. This one is near and dear to my heart because when I interview candidates, I ask them, my first question to them is, tell me a little bit about early influencers. I want to hear about things that helped shape them and helped develop them into the person that I see there on paper. And it's a great question to just kind of open up that door. And oftentimes when you're in an interview, say you're in an interview with a search committee, they'll start out with a question like that as well. And anytime you get that, I say this is a 3 to 5 minute answer on your part. It's not a recap of your resume. It's what's the net impression of you that you want to leave with these people? It's your infomercial. So it helps you kind of develop that rapport. So talk about, be genuine. Talk about what's important to you. Why are you interested in the opportunity? What's your philosophy of leadership? Highlight 1 or 2 things that you feel make you uniquely prepared for this opportunity. So give them a little bit of background into you and who you are. And also, the personal info side is something that's up to you. I oftentimes tell candidates, if you're comfortable sharing some information, some personal information, and I'm talking more about working with search committees. So, the search committee might throw out, and I say a search committee, but if you're doing a panel interview, they might throw out the question, tell us a little bit about yourself. And what you want to put, anything you want to say from a personal perspective is certainly up to you, but the goal of that question, no matter if it's in a group setting or an individual setting, is really just to create that connection and to build off of that through the rest of the interview. I oftentimes also will tell people that, you want to make sure that you are yourself, that you are open, upfront, honest. If you're a little nervous, state that at that same time as well.
So authenticity is key in that one.
Absolutely.
As well. All right. Another favorite question. Tell me about a professional weakness. Bill, you want to speak to that one?
Sure. Well, I'm always looking for evidence that relates to the skills and competencies that I want to hire for. So whatever weakness has been turned around, it should be related to this job and what you can do now. I don't want to hear the obvious ones. I overachieve and intimidate my colleagues. That one's a throwaway. I hear a lot. But I do want to see, whatever accomplishment is over the weaknesses is relevant. The other piece that I look at is what they say about other people when they overcome the weakness, because they can. I want to make sure that they're having ownership and responsibility with whatever problem they came. If they start pointing fingers about their former employer, colleagues, or their settings, that's a red flag. So the weakness is an indicator of those other issues as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, John, the other perennial favorite, where do you see yourself in X number of years? Any thoughts, John? Hello?
I can hear you.
We may have lost John.
Sounds like we lost John on that one. Anyone else want to pick that one up? The ever popular, where do you see yourself in X number of years?
I can chip in a little bit. I think that's a question that's is used more for more junior positions than senior positions. So I'll start with, I think, that one. And that it's, to me, it's an icebreaker, not evidence. I don't particularly ask this question. It's more like talking about the weather to me and getting to know them, and I'm not that interested in that question because it's a hypothetical one. So I'm kind of maybe a variant on that, and I don't know what John would say. John, are you back yet?
No, but this is Adrian, and I would agree in the sense that earlier on in your career, I think that is a pretty valid question. As you get further into your career, I think that piece of it becomes less important. But in terms of answering that, I also think that, what you want to focus on is you want to focus on gaining experience and adding to your skill set. And it's not so much a focus of I want to be as X number, at this title. I want to gain this skill set, and I want to add to my portfolio of expertise by doing X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm. So it's really a growth question rather than a destination question to a certain extent.
I believe so.
Yeah. John, sounds like you're back. Did you have anything you wanted to add on that one?
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. I'm having some technical difficulties, and I will blame the construction crew next door for probably jiggling at a phone line or something. Can you ask the question again so I can...
It was the interview question about where do you see yourself in X years?
So the answer that people want to hear is, well, I want to be with you for 5 to 15 years. So there's really two questions at play there. One is, where do you see yourself from a career standpoint, which would be the roles that you might be in. And people are really just trying to get a sense of whether your personal goals may have nice overlap with the possible career progression from the role that you're discussing. I think the other thing also is people are also interested in hearing about commitment and what people wanting to hunker down and work somewhere for as long as possible. They want to invest in you and so forth.
Great points. One of the things that's I think also always a little bit tricky for people is preparing for compensation-based questions, and some things have changed in that area. Bill, you want to start with addressing the whole preparation and compensation-based questions and how that's changed certainly over the last year?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to the new pay equity laws in the U.S., and it's a change in public policy that's in place in Philadelphia, New York, parts of California, and my hunches will be everywhere in a year or two in all the states. And it's a public policy issue, which basically starts with historically discriminated groups have understandably lower salaries. So if you ask what your current salary is, you're at a disadvantage. So we've now adopted the new standard by which we do not ask what your current salary is, which is helpful for negotiation, but we can't ask that anymore. We just ask what range would you consider for this position? So in terms of preparation, think a lot about that range. You can also, if you decide, share your current salary, but that's up to you. So that's a big change in the compensation world. And I always like ranges. If someone says I want 250, I don't know if it's the bottom, is that the mean? So I'm a range guy from way back. The other thing I think we're seeing is because of the pay equity laws, big changes in salary ranges. So I've seen companies saying this position is now 250 to 400. because they don't know how to negotiate it. So I don't know. I think that's related to the new pay equity laws, but I'm not sure. So again, prepare, arrange, and a subset of that, you could ask what is the range, but you may not get it from the search consultant. That's a start.
Okay, great. Adrian, what about just sort of drilling down at that? Is there anything that you recommend in terms of if the search consultant is not necessarily bringing it up, is there a point at which the candidate should, how early or at what stage in the process should the compensation be discussed?
Yeah, this is always one of those sticky issues, right? And it's becoming stickier as John just discussed. I think that or that as Bill just discussed, I apologize. But I think the issue is really what search consultants and what you as a candidate want to understand is, am I in the right range? I don't want to be talking to you about a search that their range is, in the 2 to 350,000 mark, and you're already at 400,000 and are looking for your next move. So that's where it really, that's at the early stages where it really comes into play. And so I think I would be very surprised if a search consultant didn't ask you about the range, your expected range. If they're not allowed to ask you about your comp. In states where we can still ask compensation questions, we very specifically ask, what is your compensation? And again, it's primarily, it's two-part. It's to make sure that we're talking, that the opportunity is appropriate for you. And it's also, though, to help you get started, because I will tell you so many times candidates don't think about that piece, and when I say the piece, I don't just mean base salary, but I mean all of the other pieces and prerequisites, the perquisites that go into this that make a full package. And so we ask those questions early and ask them in a way that we want to make sure we're talking in the same range.
Mm-hmm. All right. What about dress code, body language, those kinds of things? John, any advice on that topic, on dress code, body language, or behavior in the interview?
Sure. Another topic that I tend to be rabid about, this one falls into the category of this is all stuff that we can directly control ourselves, so we should crush it. So when it comes to dress code, maybe I can illustrate this with some humor. So I'll just say on a serious note, it's better to dress up than to dress down. So people will ask me all the time when they're going in for an interview. Let's say it's a CXO role or a VP role. Are those guys business casual over there, and should I wear a tie if it's a man, for example? And I have to say, I still say the same thing. I say, well, when in doubt, I would just go ahead and wear a tie, because it's better to overdress than underdress. And yesterday I was visiting with a company in the Southeast, and the HR guy said the same thing: better to overdress than underdress, even though they were not wearing ties. So, I think it's important to dress well, especially for leadership positions. It's pretty much a given. Body language and behavior, there's some really neat TED Talks out there. Amy Cuddy, I think it is, who teaches at Harvard, has a neat TED Talk about body language and behavior. And, people really do pick up on the confidence that you express through how you handle yourself in the moment. So how you place your hands, how you address people, the lack of fidgeting or restlessness and tapping your feet and things like that. They pick up on things like, for example, leaving your phone on volume and putting it on the table, playing with your phone. These are all things that people notice. You can come across like you're not paying attention and you're not fully engaged. So I always just tell people, you should just be yourself, but you should also take some care to dress appropriately. if you're a fidgety person, you just have to kind of watch your nature and put the phone in your pocket and make sure it's on mute. And from a behavior standpoint, one quick thing I've noticed is some of the feedback I get from folks is, well, I really like so-and-so, but she kept interrupting me, so I really didn't feel like she was listening to me. So I'll tell you, I'm a habitual interrupter. So I know for me, I have a mental Post-it note that says, when in doubt, don't interrupt, because you do it a lot.
Great advice. Thank you. I'm going to move on to a question here about preparation. How does it differ if you're looking internal versus external interviewing? So if you're the way I'm taking this is internal, meaning within your own company for a position, you're already an internal candidate, versus an external candidate. Adrian, can you speak to that?
Well, certainly. So it's awkward, right, if you're an internal candidate. There's no way around it, because you're sitting there and you're interviewing with people that you work with probably on a daily basis. You need to get over that, and you need to be able to position yourself as in the role that you are interviewing for. You need to get them to see you in that role and not the role that you're currently in. Beyond that, you approach it in the very same way. You don't assume that they know your background, because I will tell you, I've worked here at Whitkiefer for 9 years now, and most of the people I work with probably don't know the full extent of the background that I bring to the table. So don't assume that they know it. Use that experience that you've had that helps round you out as a candidate, and show that you've put thought into the role, I think, if that you're an internal candidate. And especially, and I'm focusing on that because so much of what we've been talking about kind of is that external part. As I said, if you're an internal candidate, you know more about that organization and that opportunity, the position that you're interviewing for, than any other candidate that you're going to be competing against. What you want to do is paint a picture for them of what things would look like if you were the leader of that area, if you were in that position. And again, approach it in the very same way, in the very same professional, factual, using examples, not assuming not assuming that they know you inside and out. Address the elephant on the table. Hey, you guys know me. This is awkward, and move on.
Great. Good advice. Thank you. I'm going to move on here on to talking about sort of what is it that makes an interview, someone stand out in an interview. How do you deliver on that? Adrian, if you would talk a little bit about, and I know this is obviously going to vary from position to position, but there are core attributes that interviewers are looking for at the executive level. What are your thoughts about what do you look for in an executive?
So I think that there are some key critical skills that are needed in an executive level, or as I call it, in the C-suite. And this can, and I don't think these vary based on the type of position that you're looking for. I think first and foremost, it's an executive presence. And I don't mean necessarily the grooming, the appearance piece, but as John just discussed, we can't ignore that certainly. But I mean, are you confident? But it's that border of being, or that balance of being confident but not overly confident. But are you confident? Do you exude confidence? Is this somebody that I have confidence in the ability to lead and to take on this role? Do you have composure? And this is all part of executive presence, I think. It's, do you have composure under stress? You see people, and they handle stressful situations very well. You see other people, and you talk to them, and they're always harried, they're overworked. Well, that leads people to think that, you're kind of maxed out by your current role, and can you, do you really have the ability to take on more? So that composure under stress, I think, is critical. Are you motivational? Do you get people to rally around ideas? Are you a positive thinker? And I think, and those are all part of executive presence. I think 3 other ones that I want to mention briefly are curiosity. Are you not accepting of the current state? Or are you always looking for better? Do you bring new ideas to the table? Do you ask pertinent questions? Do you get people to kind of think out of the box? And how resilient are you? Can you bounce back from setbacks and handle adversity? Be able to move on from things. And I think the last one that is the critical piece is, are you authentic? Are you genuine? Yet you have executive presence, as we talked about, but you've got a real authenticity to you, and that's something that you can't make up. And that genuine approach is critical in the skill set for an executive level leader.
Right. Thank you. Moving on with how can candidates ensure that they make their interview memorable and meaningful and hopefully in a good way? Bill, what are your thoughts?
Well, based on what we said before, all the preparation and the ability to have a good conversation authentically and curiosity, at some point, candidates overthink. I want them just to listen. They try to think about all the different reasons why the interviewer is asking the question, and basically say, don't think so much. Listen, look at the interviewer in the eye, talk directly and briefly, and answer the question. That would make a big difference in almost every interview. So that's what I'm looking for. And the other part to what Adrian was just talking about is a strong knowledge and skill set. I want demonstration that you don't have in addition to all the leadership qualities, actually you have a knowledge base that I'm looking for.
Excellent. Okay. Adrian, anything you want to add on that in terms of making it memorable?
I think, if you bring your mom to the interview with you, that might make it memorable. But, I really don't think there's any magic to it. I think you, again, want to be authentic. You want to use some humor and show them, that, and I think the other piece is make sure you use examples. We haven't really talked about this yet, but as you're going through and delivering that interview, use examples. People don't want to hear about how you would or what type of leader you are and how you would approach a situation. They want to hear about how you have approached a certain situation. So use examples as much as you can, and that's going to be memorable for them. And then I think the only other piece is make sure you thank them and acknowledge your interest in the opportunity.
All right. John, what do interviewers want to know but don't always explicitly ask?
There are a bunch of things that we're wondering, whether it's the search folks as well as the client. One is, are you a jerk? I think I started with a little humor, but I think the things that people look for, and I'll just give a list of a few that are fairly routine. I'll address the audience. If you have long stints with companies, you won't have the question that somebody who's had a lot of short stints will have to address, or at least think about, which is, why have you been leaving companies after every 2 years? So I will just address the elephant in the room with folks and say, hey, you've changed companies 4 times in. That's my definition of choppy. Can you tell me why it's not choppy, and can we talk about this? So that's one thing people look for, is career stability and frequent changing of companies. If there's a great story, that's great. If somebody really can't address it, it's a concern. Another thing is also, what is it that you're looking for? I'll just kind of make a little mini topic here, which is there are really 3 or 4 sort of key scenarios when people are looking at opportunities. You can be looking at a growth opportunity. You can be looking at more of a steady state, maintaining type of company role, et cetera, and then a turnaround. So people want to get a sense that what you're looking for lines up with what they're doing. So if it's high growth, they want to get a sense that you're a high growth type individual, and that you guys will be aligned. But people are really looking to get a sense of what your people skills are like. Adrian said this earlier, was a great topic, but they also want to get a feel for what you're like under stress, when the chips are down, when you get the call from the EPA. How do you handle major problems? How do you handle major fraud, things like that? So, are you a cool cat, or are you freaking out? So, people do want to get a sense of your career stability and why you make changes, and why you will commit to us, and the other things I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to the worst mistakes ever made by executive candidates. Bill, any thoughts? We have any horror stories you'd like to share on worst mistakes?
We have. I'll come up with 3 or so. One I hear most about is talking negatively about a former employer. That will turn everybody off. And what I advise people is talk about the former employer as if they were in the room, and that seems to handle that. Another thing that is, you just can't do is be late. And if you are late, you better text or email and have a pretty good reason. So that's not the worst late, but that's consistently bad. And the third, I would say, and I don't know what the other recruiters think about this, is going around us. The client has retained us, they have a question or concern, and they go directly to the hiring manager. That's not acceptable. It doesn't show chain of command. So those are the 3 that come to mind. There are worse, but those are pretty bad.
Any, John or Adrian, anything you want to add there as mistakes that you would flag on that one?
I think for me, it's not listening. I can't tell you how many times I have had candidates in that and it's when you get to do a search committee interview or interview with a panel, oftentimes we may be in the room just kind of as observers, if you would, and where candidates candidates don't listen to the question that's being asked. Because of course, you're on display, right? You've got to be ready to go with answers, and you're thinking about your next answer, but you don't actually listen to the question that's asked, I'm a proponent of, as people are asking questions, don't hesitate to have a notepad in front of you and take a note if it's a multi-part question, to make sure you go back and you answer the different pieces of their question.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'm going to also ask here, we've talked about the questions that the recruiters are asking. John, what questions should candidates be asking during the interview? Are there any questions that they should avoid? Things like that. What's your take on that?
Sure. So, the obvious, for executive positions, the obvious questions to avoid would be going into great detail about compensation and benefits in say, a first-round interview. This is something that will typically be addressed after the person has concluded all of their interviews, and that's when that should be handled. The questions that folks should ask is, people are interviewing for a job with a panel of interviewers. This is the prime time to go into the questions that you have to, for example, to the company executives to validate some of the things that you were hearing from the search consultant. Let's say, for example, the role is very much focused on being part of a growth story. Well, this is the opportunity to start at a high level and then dropping down to more of a microscopic level to understand what that growth story looks like. Just to give an example, one of the companies I was meeting with last week, the growth story is to double revenues, going from 400 to 800 million in the next 7 years. I didn't really realize that until we met with them to kick the thing off. And I asked a lot of questions pertaining to what that growth looks like and whether that would be through acquisitions, organic growth, and then we got into other interesting subtopics with respect to that regarding how this president general manager role, is it really more of a commercial sales leader type of role given the growth mandate, or what does that look like? And actually what my perception of the role changed as we met. I mean, it really was more of a commercial role, more than I had realized in terms of growth, because I didn't realize they wanted to double in size. So I think it's just a really great opportunity for people to dig in and get it right from the horse.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and how many questions would I suggest people ask? I think it's more about conversation blocks. I think you guys need to manage the clock. If you know you have a 90-minute interview, watch the clock and plan to go through probably 2 or 3 series of questions. And if you don't get to all your questions, there can be follow-up phone calls.
All right. Well, that's a great segue into our next topic here, which is about a proactive follow-up and securing the offer. So, Bill, let's talk about when and how should a candidate make their first contact post-interview?
Well, there's a lot of disagreement about this, but I like to see a thoughtful email go out within 24 hours. And thoughtful means it sort of reflects on the conversation, raises some questions, and summarizes next steps and shows their interest following up. Secondarily, it's a writing sample, but it really should be done. I had a client who interviewed 2 people the same day, and I was checking in with the client the next day, and he said, gee, candidate X was great. They got right back to me. What happened to candidate Y? So I called up candidate Y and said, well, gee, I went home and I wrote a letter and I put it in the mail. And he went to second place right away. So it's an email environment these days. And then the recruiter will get back to you when they need to. If you don't hear from them, I'd suggest a check-in call and a check-in email in 10 days, and then play it by ear after that. I don't know if the other people on the panel agree with those recommendations, but those make sense to me.
All right. What anyone want to chime in, agree, disagree on that one?
Email best, snail mail bad.
Yeah.
Email good. Okay. Adrian, what other actions can they take post-interview to remain proactive?
So I think that, you should always ask when you're leaving an interview with whomever it may be about timing on decisions for next steps. I think that's very appropriate. And I think that I do agree that a follow-up call to find out where things stand is totally appropriate in a week to 10 days if you haven't heard. I think that you want to make sure that you show your interest. And we actually, I'm not even going to say we, I lost a search because I didn't want to appear, I didn't want to, be the pesky recruiter trying to get a search from someone and from a potential client. And I lost the search because I wasn't seen as eager enough and hungry enough for the job, for the role. And so it's a balance, right? I was balancing it, thinking that I didn't want to be that pesky recruiter calling them saying, hey, where are things? Have you made a decision yet? On the other side of the coin, the other firm had a better balance and balanced it enough to the point where they did, and they remained a follow-up. I also think it's kind of that's a good time when you can, if there's something that's pertinent to your conversation, an article you wrote, an article you read, a connection of some sort, to follow up with that. Again, just showing the continued the continued presence and connections you have with them.
All right. And finally, one question that I get asked a lot is, how do we get feedback from recruiters about our performance? And I know it can be touchy on both sides. So I'd like to ask each of you quickly. John, any thoughts about asking for feedback as a candidate?
We may have lost him again.
He's
Sounds
speechless.
Like... Well, evidently he doesn't want anyone to ask for feedback. Adrian, what are your thoughts about asking for feedback?
I suggest you always ask. You may not always get it, to be honest, because sometimes there just isn't a great answer. So oftentimes at the end of the day, if you're one of the final candidates, it comes down to chemistry, and that's a very hard thing to pinpoint of what you could or couldn't have done differently. But I would always ask post-interview, not at the very end of your interview, but at a follow-up point. And if you're going to ask, then take it to heart and don't become defensive. I have had people ask and then they become defensive when I give feedback. So if you're going to ask, make sure that you're ready to hear what they have to say and take that to heart.
Mm-hmm. Bill, what are your thoughts on asking for feedback?
It's tough because I got in a lot of trouble trying to help people. And then they disagreed or they negotiated and the decision was made anyway. And so what I try to do is give them feedback that will make them feel okay and whole. So it's usually one or two pieces of objective information, maybe about the person who got the job. So we did an international search and the person really wasn't qualified, but the other person had 5 languages. He said, well, the other person had 5 languages. He said, okay. So it sort of got us off the hook, and I just couldn't get into his whole life story. But there's a secondary piece here. I placed a lot of people for jobs not for the first time I interviewed them. So how somebody takes the feedback is very important. So if they're gracious and constructive, I'm more likely to go back to them the next time.
Oh, that's excellent advice. Thank you, Bill. We're going to take we've got some great questions coming in. So I'm going to just take a few here. This is a question I hear often is, how do you address in an interview the very personal topic of taking a break from the workforce because of family reasons, either children or elder care, something like that? Anyone want to take that one?
This is Adrian, and I think you address it straight up. I had an opportunity to stay home and raise my kids for the last 5 years. It is something that I don't regret, and yet during that XYZ, I gained experience. I did whatever. I think you address it straight up. It is it's part of who you are. And I took a break for about 1.5 years at one point in my career, and I can't tell you how many people, I thought it would be a big deal, and I can't tell you how many people said to me, I'm jealous. I wish I could have done that.
Okay. Another touchy question sometimes is, or not exactly a question, but any tips that you have for job seekers who are actually older than the people who are interviewing them by, say, 5 to 10 years?
Well, hang out with younger people, make you more comfortable with them, might be the start. And the second, and it's sort of related to that, is the older, I'm a baby boomer, so we'll just make it easier to have the conversation here. So don't say, this is my last chapter. I really want a great run and whatever. Don't go into that. But getting back to your question too, I think it's good if you have experience with younger people and it'll show in the interview.
And more, old is relative, and older is relative. Our average age of our CEOs is going up, of our CEO placements is going up. you've got experience, and that's what you want. Forget about age. You rely on your experiences and your style, your approach, and age should be secondary.
John here. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Hi, John.
I've been having some connectivity issues. I think Sprint is mad at me. So just a shout to Sprint. I love you guys. I've been a 20-year customer. So whatever I've done, please forgive me. So it's kind of funny. I'm starting to have meetings where I'm the oldest person in the room, and I myself am kind of grappling with that. And I think the advice I'd give people is just roll with it. I mean, it's just a reality. I'm meeting 35-year-old CEOs, and I'm 51. It's just what it looks like, So I think just be comfortable with it, and just roll with it. It's not like every time we're going to interview somebody with somebody, they're going to be 5 years my senior.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and everybody looks like they're 14 who's the CEO. So I know the feeling. All right, here's another one that I think is an interesting one here. Any recommendations about preparing for panel interviews, because you try and how you can connect with everyone, or the best way to at least have some connection with all of the panel members?
Is this a live interview?
Yes.
So if you can, go around and look in their eyes and shake their hand and mention their name, the starter.
Yeah, and I think in those panel interviews, I think they are tough, right? But when you're answering someone's question, you answer that person's question, and you look around the table secondarily. But that way, because typically in a panel interview, every individual will have at least one question for you. And so you make that connection with them as you're answering that question, where you look at them and you talk to them, and not to the complete, not completely ignoring everyone else, but you look at that person specifically answering their questions and then glance around the room. So that gives you that personal connection with them at least during that time frame, and then make sure you do your homework and you know a little bit about every person. I've had candidates that do a great job of, when they go around the table and people are introducing themselves, they make just a 2-second comment. Oh yeah, I saw that you have blah, or I know that you did that, or we went to the same college or something. So a very quick connection, if you can, at least with a few of the people on that you're meeting with in the panel.
Great advice.
I think they are tricky, and I think it's. I was in, for example, I was in one yesterday with 3 people, and I think it's important just to be normal. I mean, we're all in group meetings all of the time, and this only differs because it's about selection of me or something. So I think in that context, it's okay if person 1 is asking a lot of the questions. It's sort of okay to just focus on person 1, but also look for opportunities to catch eye contact with person 2 and 3, and make sure that you're connecting with them. Or even, like in my case, I asked a question, said, hey, that's great, Tim. Susan, you only joined the company a couple of years ago, and so I'm kind of curious to hear what your experiences are of joining, ABC Co. and what you learned about the company that you would share to a new hire. So just looking for ways to kind of engage and keep it, not just focused on one person.
Mm-hmm. Here's another one for you, related to compensation. Usually, when we were talking, I think we were talking primarily about, mostly about base compensation. But what if, how do you deal with it, or how much detail should you go into if your current compensation is a lot of it is coming from non-W-2 sources, stock options, incentives, other things, equity, that type of thing? Is there a appropriate way to answer that, or just ask if how would you deal with that?
Oh man,
if
Tell
most
me
of your
now.
compensation is not in base?
Can I just jump right into the pool on that one? Tell me right away. I had a situation last year for a what we'll call a chief sales officer role, and the person wasn't really sharing some of their long-term comp information and shared it much later, and their compensation, their long-term incentive was really unusually high, and it was a real outlier for that role in that particular industry. So it really became a challenge to figure out how to structure the compensation. So I'm a huge fan of early disclosure. It doesn't really hurt anything, and it only helps alert us to the fact that you have stock options, that are 3 times market.
Yeah, I agree. It's not something you work out in the first interview. You just have to sort of raise the issue, and then when you go deeper into negotiation, you can verify and put everything on the table.
All right, and here's another one I think that's timely, particularly for international assignments, or a lot of it is done through video or through Skype, through whatever. Anybody have any special recommendations for handling yourself in those types of interviews where you're not physically present in the same room?
I use RingCentral and Skype frequently. We all do in our office because we have international assignments, for example, or we've got somebody who's in California and I just can't get out there that quickly. Video use has become quite ubiquitous in the search space. I just tell people to practice with it. Practice with it and be normal. And of course, I think it's kind of a Captain Obvious thing. Make sure you're not doing it in a room where behind you you've got piles of dirty laundry, or funky things that aren't really appropriate to the conversation. True story. I really had somebody do that, and I really questioned their decision making given the stuff that was behind them.
Good point. So keep it professional, and it certainly, at least on a visual sense as well. So,
well,
and also just make sure you. I think also just make sure you check your connections beforehand. You test your ability to connect beforehand, because one of the most frustrating things is when someone hasn't done that, and you spend the first 15 minutes trying to get their connection working.
All right, great. Well, I want to say thank you to everybody today for being here. What a great group and great participation here. I'm going to ask each of you if you've got a quick word of advice to pass on to our listeners today. John, how about you?
Yeah, thank you. And again, it's always a lot of fun to do this, these webinars. So my advice for people, number one, is be yourself, because I want you to be yourself as much as you possibly can be during the interview process, because ultimately that will really influence their selection of you. So I want you to be yourself so that when you go into the company, you all continue to have the same kind of chemistry and rapport that you had while you were being yourself during the interview, because I think that really goes a long way to having good alignment and stick and things like that. The interview is really an opportunity for people to gather information, get excited about the opportunity and the company and the mission, the people, et cetera. But it's also an opportunity where you need to be prepared and you need to be organized. And that goes up a lot as you go from director to VP to CXO. As you go up the chain, the people are looking for you to be more organized, to handle more problems, to be able to handle more scale, to be a leader, to make decisions. So again, if you feel like you're ready for that step or whatever, just kind of pull it all together and be prepared to do all of those things.
All right. Bill, how about you?
To add to that, earlier I said don't think too much, but you could do that if you've done all the preparation. So what I suggest sometimes to think back to successful interviews you've had before where you were curious, you wanted the job more after the interview, there was a good give and take, and actually you got a next step. And if you could sort of call on that experience, it's easier to be yourself and have fun in the interview.
All right, and Adrian, last word.
I think it boils down to, for me, is balancing confidence with humility. You want to make sure that you walk into any interview confident that you can do the job that you're interviewing for, but also humble enough so that you have the ability to connect with others and show them the true side of who you are and your skill sets.
Love that.
Yep.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, all of you, for being on today's webinar. Great topic and great answers. Really appreciate it. All right. Just to recap our specials, if you're a member of Blue Steps, please, and you want to purchase an executive resume and from us, you can also get a complimentary hour of interview coaching. So don't forget we have that special offer going here. If you're not a Blue Steps member yet, you can get 15% off using the discount code of Executive15 at checkout. So thank you all for being with us today, and we look forward to having you join us next time. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This does conclude today's webinar. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at any time.